Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at how much El Chapo actually made. Now before we start, I want you to hit that red subscribe button so you don't miss any of our videos in the future. Let's get into it. In his 30-year career as one of Mexico's wiliest and most successful drug lords, Joaquin Guzman Loera, better known as El Chapo, made so much money selling drugs that he once owned a pair of yachts, a fleet of Learjets, and a private zoo with tigers, crocodiles, and panthers. His fortune was vast enough that he was named to Forbes' magazine's annual list of billionaires 4 times. But now the federal prosecutors who convicted Mr. Guzman at his trial this winter in New York have put an actual price tag on his earnings, calculating the amount down to the dollar, and they want him to pay it back. Late last week, the prosecutors filed a forfeiture request against the kingpin, laying out in remarkable detail how he had transformed staggering quantities of drugs into equally staggering profits over the years. From the early 1990s until his arrest in 2016, the prosecutors said Mr. Guzman handled nearly 600,000 kilograms of cocaine, worth more than $11 billion, 200 kilograms of heroin, worth more than $11 million, and at least 420,000 kilograms of marijuana, worth about $846 million. Now, for obvious reasons, drug lords aren't exactly good at filing taxes and keeping accounting records, which is why we don't really have the exact figures for their wealth. And that's why we're going to use guesstimates from various sites in our rankings. Our original plan was to use at least 2 independent sources for each drug lord to calculate our guesstimates. After we started looking for guesstimates, we noticed that a 2012 Business Insider article was used as the main source for most of the articles that are on page 1 of Google search results. For example, Al Capone's wealth in 2012 was reported at $1.3 billion by Business Insider. Several other websites reported the same number several years later. Obviously, these reporters aren't aware of inflation and time value of money. We'll be using inflation-adjusted numbers in our article. Consumer Price Index in 2012 was 229.6 and increased to 259.9 in 2020. That means that $1.3 billion in 2012 is equivalent to nearly $1.47 billion in 2020. Now, El Chapo isn't the biggest and the richest drug kingpin of all time by a long shot. He's getting all this publicity because we live in the social media age. In 2019, federal prosecutors estimated in their court documents that El Chapo handled 600,000 kilograms of cocaine and 420,000 kilograms of marijuana. The cocaine was valued at more than $11 billion and the marijuana was valued at $846 million. The total estimate for El Chapo's gross drug sale proceeds since early 1990s was less than $12.7 billion. This isn't his profit, this is his total revenue in a business that's extremely expensive to run. Bruce Bagley, a 74-year-old University of Miami professor, estimated El Chapo's net worth between $2 to $4 billion, and we think he was being generous. By the way, Bruce Bagley, the expert on Mexican drug cartels, was charged with money laundering in 2019. He pleaded guilty to helping to launder $2.5 million in exchange for a $250,000 payment. We would have asked him about his latest estimates for El Chapo's wealth, but he probably has other things on his mind as he is scheduled to be sentenced on October 1st. But we're going to assume El Chapo's wealth is at about $3 billion. During the 1980s, the leading crime syndicate in Mexico was the Guadalajara cartel, which was headed by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, alias El Padrino or the Godfather, Rafael Caro Quintero, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, alias Don Nito, Juan Jose Marino, alias El Azul or the Blue One, and others. In the 1970s, Guzman first worked for the drug lord Hector El Guero Palmer by transporting drugs and overseeing their shipments from the Sierra Madre region to the urban areas near the US-Mexico border by aircraft. Since his initial steps in organized crime, Guzman was ambitious and regularly pressed on his superiors to allow him to increase the share of narcotics that was smuggled across the border. He also favored a rather violent and serious approach when doing business. If any of his drug shipments were not on time, Guzman would simply kill the smuggler himself by shooting him in the head. Those around him learned that cheating him or going with other competitors, even if they offered better prices, was unwise. The leaders of the Guadalajara cartel liked Guzman's business acumen, and in the early 1980s introduced him to Felix Gallardo, one of the major drug lords in Mexico at the time. Guzman worked as a chauffeur for Felix before he put him in charge of logistics, where Guzman coordinated drug shipments from Colombia to Mexico by land, air, and sea. Palmer ensured the deliveries arrived in the United States. Guzman earned enough standing and began working for Felix Gallardo directly. Throughout most of the late 1970s and early 1980s, the Mexican drug traffickers were also middlemen for the Colombian trafficking groups, and transported cocaine through the US and Mexico border. Mexico, however, remained a secondary route for the Colombians, given that most of the drugs trafficked by their cartels were smuggled through the Caribbean and the Florida border. Felix Gallardo was the leading drug baron in Mexico and a friend of Juan Ramon Mata Ballesteros, but his operations were still limited by his counterparts in South America. In the mid-1980s, however, the US government increased law enforcement surveillance and put pressure on the Medellin and Cali cartels by effectively reducing the drug trafficking operations in the Caribbean border. Realizing it was more profitable to hand over the operations to their Mexican counterparts, the Colombian cartels gave Felix Gallardo more control over their drug shipments. This power shift gave the Mexican organized crime groups more leverage over their Central American and South American counterparts. During the 1980s, however, the Drug Enforcement Administration was conducting undercover groundwork in Mexico, where several of its agents worked as informants. And that's all for today, folks. I hope you liked the video. If you did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another amazing video from us. Until next time.